Former President Obama National Security Advisor Susan Rice slamming President Trump's foreign policy in an editorial. She writes, "Plenty of presidents before Mr. Trump have made serious, sometimes catastrophic, foreign policy mistakes. But few, if any, decided almost every aspect of foreign policy on the basis of what would help him get reelected," she wrote. Rice's criticism comes as the president gets support from a very unlikely source. They usually go at it. But Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer said this about the president's stance on trade with China, tweeting, "Hang tough on China, President Trump. Don't back down. Strength is the only way to win with China." Here now to respond, Republican Congressman Michael Waltz of Florida and David Chafori, former Obama State Department official. David, let me start with you. Very interesting. What do you think Chuck Schumer's up to there?
Well, let me just say, Susan Rice, her criticisms have some merit. Regardless of whether you support President Trump or you're against President Trump, his foreign policy hasn't been consistent. There's no consistent ideology or approach. So take Venezuela, for instance.
I know, but you know what? I wanted to address the Schumer-China thing first, and then I promise you we're going to go back and get the bigger picture with Susan Rice. But what do you think that Senator Schumer is up to there?
Well, President Trump's trade policy, I think, is consistent. He does have a consistent ideology there. And Schumer is basically saying he supports President Trump in taking a stronger approach to China, that China is cheating in trade rules, that China steals our intellectual property, and that's hurting American businesses and hurting the American economy. So Democrats and Republicans are united in that sense in the broad approach to toughening up the trade policies with respect to China.
Yeah. Michael, let me get your thought on China and Schumer, because I have to believe that when President Xi looks at that, or his advisors look at that, you know, they're trying to decide if they're going to send that full delegation over to wrestle over China in the coming days, and they see a united front from the United States Congress. I think that might be a powerful message.
Well, you know, that was refreshing coming from the senator, that we do have to be united. China has absolutely stolen our technological edge, outright theft. We're seeing everything from hypersonic missiles to stealth fighters to them challenging us in space, again, because of China's theft. And the president has to stay strong. I think that's what President Xi understands. And it's good and nice for a change to see Congress having his back, that politics stops at the water's edge. But it is especially rich, Martha, coming from Susan Rice, who did nothing on China, nothing on North Korea, allowed Russia to invade Crimea and Ukraine, allowed Syria to devolve into chaos. And let's not forget my not good friend Bowe Berghdal, that she declared a hero on the Sunday talk shows after he, you know, and then watch him get convicted as a traitor. That got people killed.
Said he had served with honor
I just
and
can't believe
distinction.
coming from her.
All right, so David, let me give you the opportunity to talk about Susan Rice in reaction to what Michael Waltz just said.
Well, in contrast to Trump's trade policy, which I do think is consistent from country to country, his foreign policy has not been consistent. So take Venezuela. President Trump says he doesn't want to be the policeman of the world, but his administration is now talking about intervention in Venezuela. Take, for instance, Iran, where he's taken a forceful, strong approach toward Iran, but he says he sees eye to eye with Putin and Russia, but Russia is Iran's biggest backer. Take Cuba, where we don't have a threat currently from Cuba, but he's ratcheting up sanctions against Cuba, but he wants to pull back our support and our troops from countries where there is a threat, like Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. This is confusing for anyone who's looking at foreign policy and studying our foreign policy, and it's confusing for our allies.
Michael Waltz?
No, Martha, I think he has been clear. He's been clear in looking at American interests. And in this case, in the case of Venezuela and Cuba, it's reasserting the Monroe Doctrine, and that, you know, the United States needs to lead in the Northern Hemisphere. He's also clear that he's not looking to put thousands of boots on the ground in Venezuela, that we would lead through a coalition. And he's been clear that you know, in terms of burden sharing, whether it's NATO, whether it's the Europeans, or whether it's others around the world, that these other wealthier countries need to step up and need to pay their fair share alongside the United States that's been carrying that burden for many years. So the United States has to lead, absolutely, but others that can need to share that burden. I wrote speech after speech for previous defense secretaries asking our NATO allies to live up to their 2% commitment, and they blew us off, frankly, and they're not anymore. I think the president's been loud and clear in a number of regards.
20 seconds, David, for a closing thought.
Well, Congressman Waltz is smart. He talked about the Monroe Doctrine. Trump may be applying it in Venezuela, but he's not applying it in other places in the Western Hemisphere. He wants to cut off aid and support to Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala. That's the type of support that the Monroe Doctrine calls for, leadership in Central America. He's not providing that in other places.
All right. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Good to have both of you here tonight.
Thank you.